This is your home of independent, fearless and credible journalism, and this morning government says it will wean off public tertiary institutions from public payroll and provide them with a fixed amount or what it calls a block grant instead. Now, this is among key austerity measures announced by the Finance Minister Clemente Park yesterday to deal with the crippling economy. There's been mixed reactions since yesterday, with many dreading the long-term implication on the masses. But should that really be a cause for worry? Well, we'll find out soon. But let's first hear from the Finance Minister Clemente Park when he addressed the nation yesterday.
I'm here today to announce to you measures to address the economic difficulties we are facing due mainly to recent global and domestic events. These difficulties have manifested in rising fuel prices, rising inflation and cost of living, exchange rate depreciation, rising interest rates, and revenue mobilization challenges. Government had its first regular quarterly retreat for 2022 from 18th to 20th March at Pacquiao, concluding in Accra on Monday, the 21st of March. During the retreat, Cabinet deliberated extensively on a number of issues and approved a number of measures to support current efforts to address the challenges we are facing. Also on Monday, March 21st, 2022, the Bank of Ghana announced a
So that's the Finance Minister. Apologies, he's not speaking to the issue of weaning off public universities from government payroll. We'll bring you that soundbite shortly. But that is essentially what government has announced, that public universities will be taken off the payroll. What does this mean? Joining us via Zoom is the Deputy Ranking Member on Parliament's Education Committee, Dr. Clemente Park. We also have the Executive Director of the Africa Education Watch, Kofi Asare, and Julius Anthony, who is the General Secretary of the National Union of Ghana Students. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time here on NewsDesk. Let me start with you, Dr. Park. What do you make of this measure announced by the Finance Minister?
Well, let me say good morning to you, to viewers and listeners. I find it worrisome because I fail to understand why a country whose citizens are currently undergoing the level of hardships that we are facing are being told that government is going to de-subvent public universities. You must remember that university education is not free. The only reason why the fees that students pay to go to university is at least within range for the average student from your average background is largely because of government subvention. So if this proposal that government is making, which I totally disagree with, were to become a reality, what this would mean is that the universities would then have to find their own ways of generating enough resources to, for example, pay lecturers and other non-teaching staff at the universities. And if this is to happen, naturally, consequentially, the universities would then have to charge students the fees that would allow them to survive in the absence of government subvention. So the implications are very far-reaching and potentially dire in determining who can afford university education in Ghana.
Well, Dr. Park, if that is the price we would have to pay in order to improve quality at the tertiary level, why is that not justified? Especially when we have heard from our university managers all the time say that they are not given the room to charge what they term approved fees in order to generate enough resources to run the university in a manner that they would like to. Shouldn't this be a good move? Already we've seen a decline in government subvention over the years. What difference would this make?
Well, I disagree. I don't see how this proposal relates to quality. I don't see it. And the point I'm making is that it is about the student, it is about the population, it is about the ability to pay. And governments are there for a reason. Remember that we are a developing country. Ours is a population that still struggles to attain basic necessities for survival. Are you telling me that it is proper for us to disubvent the 15 public universities and to allow the universities to charge whatever amounts they deem fit to be able to run their programs? Is that not even going to widen the gap between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots? We obviously cannot embark in this trajectory. And look, it is true that we are currently facing economic crisis. But some of the proposals that are being propounded, to me, are only going to worsen the plight of the people of this country. And that is an example. Even in the current dispensation, with the subvention, with the fact that the fees of the university student is hugely subsidized, not all students are able to mobilize the resources to even pay the fees as of today. And you think that they will be able to pay the fees if it is then open and the universities are allowed to charge whatever amounts they deem fit to be able to run?
Dr. Park, we'll return to this.
Social imbalance in our society, and that is a long to medium-term effect.
And indeed, it's really about, finding that fine line between improving quality at the university level, getting the resources that are required to do so, but also meeting that social need and making sure that we help the poor. Let me bring in Kofi Asare. Mr. Sari, how is this done elsewhere such that you are able to strike a fine balance?
Well, let me indicate that the first time this discussion came up was around 2014, when the then Vice President of blessed memory made this proposal as part of measures by government to reduce the expenditure on compensation in tertiary institutions. As we are aware, government expenditure in the education sector, if you look at GOG's direct funding, more than 95% of GOG's direct funding goes into compensation, that is salaries. So reducing government expenditure in the sector means reducing compensation. Well, that is the bulk of the budget. So it came up, and then somewhere along the line it died down. I'm surprised it's coming up again, in the sense that our universities are currently overburdened with heaps of students. I know lecturers who are handling 1,000 students, one lecturer handling 1,000 students. Ideally, no lecturer should handle more than 100 or 50 students in the university. Universities are calling for more lecturers, but there are quotas, and so they are unable to get the lecturers they need. They are unable to get the clearance they need to recruit the lecturers they need. In the midst of these deficits, which is affecting quality, government is saying that, well, I don't have enough money to be paying your staff. And so I'm going to give you a grant, which is, if you like, a quota, an allocation. Use it. Once you finish, any other money you need, generate it from your IGF and then pay the staff. If you do that, there is the advantage that government will be consolidating fiscally, because you are going to ensure that there's fiscal discipline and that your expenditure on your recurrent expenditure is being checked. That's fine. So economically, it makes sense. But the implication of that policy on equitable access, on the rights conferred to Ghanaians under Article 24, 25 of the Constitution, in respect of progressively free tertiary education, and its impact on government's own targets to increase tertiary enrollment from 18% to 40% by 2030, which we have struggled to even make just 1 percentage point achievement over the past 4 years, it will affect the attainment of these targets and also constrict or restrict access to tertiary education. Why? Because the universities will now have the opportunity to charge realistic fees. And when they charge realistic fees, they will end up increasing the number of students, the percentage of students who are called fee paying. When you have that happen, the meaning is that more and more students who do not have the resources will not be able to enter tertiary education because it becomes, if you like, commodified. And so that is what this particular initiative means for the economy. It's good economically, but for education and for equitable access, it is bad.
How would you want government to approach this? Because as it stands now, it is an austerity measure because we need to save the economy. It may be a permanent feature in our national life, in the economy going forward. But how, for instance, could this be rolled out gradually? Could this be phased in a manner that will not hurt the system adversely?
This is a no. And let me tell you why it's a no. If you look at the compensation budget of the Ministry of Education, if government is intending to cut its budgets, first is that normally government will say the cuts will exclude compensation, and that the cuts normally will only affect goods and services and capital expenditure, which is CAPEX. But by making this suggestion, it means that the finance minister intends to cut compensation at tertiary level. Now, if compensation is no more insulated and can be cut, then the first item under compensation should be cut should be the teacher training allowance, because that is 250 million Ghana cedis. That is significant. So if compensation is not immune, as we thought, and indeed compensation can be capped, then the first item that has to be cut out completely from compensation is the teacher training allowance, because the teacher training allowance and lecturer salaries are all part of the compensation budget of the Ministry of Education, which the finance minister intends to reduce. That is the only thing I think should be done if we have to cut compensation and reduce expenditure in the education sector. But in terms of the salaries of lecturers, insofar as asking universities to generate more IGF to pay for the cost of their lecturers, which government is not able to cover all, you are commodifying education. And when you attempt that approach, you will end up constricting or restricting access to tertiary education to only those who can afford, because the cost will definitely be high. And if the cost is high, fewer people will be able to transfer from secondary to tertiary, and government will not be able to achieve its own target of increasing gross tertiary enrollment from 18% in 2018 to 40% by 2030. As we speak, as I told you, even without this intervention, we have only made 1 percentage point increase over the past 5 years. It tells you that even without this cost, even without this cost sharing measure, people are not, a lot more people are not able to make it to tertiary.
There's already a difficulty in that aspect. But Mr. Sari, the example is always given of the University of Professional Studies Accra, for instance, and what they've been able to do with the system that they manage. And you rightly referred to this issue coming up some years ago, I think in 2017 or so. It was in Parliament, and I recall that the University of Professional Studies Accra was given as an example of an institution that has been able to run heavily on internally generated funds. And it is doing well, at least from where we sit. Isn't it doable? And we see the numbers are not dwindling. We see a lot more people going in for that university, and they seem to be doing well.
You are making a specific case to the University of Professional Studies.
Yeah.
Look at the national data. Look at the national data. I'm saying we have stagnated at 18% gross tertiary enrollment for the past 4 years. Okay, so policies are not fashioned with just one institution in mind. They are fashioned for the whole sector. So you're talking about the public tertiary sector that currently admits about 500. I mean, that has about 500,000 students from first year to final year. And I'm saying that in the past 4 years, even without such cost barriers, we are struggling to increase gross tertiary enrollment by 1% over the past 4 years. So what you are saying is not supported by the data.
Okay.
But you don't mix two things up. There may be the peculiar case of institutions that targets skills upgrading for people who are already in industry, like GIMPA, like UPSC. Most of their students are people who are already in industry. And then they want to come and upgrade, you understand? So they are mainly for professionals. But a lot of our regular public universities, like University of Ghana, Cape Coast, UDS, and Co., are for people who are transiting from senior high school to tertiary. So these are not workers. So the extent to which they can afford such fees is very, very low compared to the extent to which an accountant who wants to go and undertake, an upgrading at UPSA, can afford. So it is quite a peculiar case for that school. But always we need to look at the bigger picture. The policy is saying that within the education strategy plan, government targets to reach gross tertiary enrollment of 40% by 2030. That target was set in 2017. It started in 2018. Between 2018 and 2022, as we speak, we have not been able to move to 9. We have not been able to move by more than 1.
We have stagnated, like you rightly mentioned. Mr. Sari, kindly hold it for me. We have Julius Anthony with us on the line. He's the General Secretary of the National Union of Ghana Students. They ultimately will be affected by this directive. Julius, I don't know how your members are reacting to this development already. Tell us.
Sincerely, there's no single student in the university who will accept this policy for any reason. And the reasons are simple. If you allow universities to now, pay their lecturers through internally generated, as the Director for African Education was rightly indicated, they will pass the cost. And who are they passing the cost to? They are passing the cost to our students, who will then have to pay for that. How many students are even able to pay their entire school fees at the start of an academic year? They are unable to, even with the current subvented situation. So without a subvention, it would mean that a lot of students who are already even in the institutions would have to fall out, because with the 60-40 arrangement of fee payment, which is in the University of Ghana and UCC, for example, if you are now coming to add compensation for lecturers as part of the school fees and all that, it would mean that what qualifies to be 60% of fee payment will no longer be. And even with that, people are unable to pay. So I don't know how government intends to roll this out and still meet their target. It is not possible, especially with free SHS, which has come to the second cycle level, where people are sort of adjusted to accessing education more seamlessly and all that. Then they are about to graduate to the tertiary level, and they now have to pay almost times 10 of what they spent in SHS, because now it's only about getting your bag and all that and going. Then you are spending more than times 10 is even an understatement. It is something which is highly impossible for parents and students to afford, and as he rightly indicated,
well, we seem to have lost.
We will not be able to meet our target of expanding us.
Very well. Julius, thank you very much. But Dr. Park is still with us on the line. Doc, how can we do this? You are worried about the situation where many will be cut out of the education system. Can we explore scholarship programs, for instance, that will target people who are unable to afford? How else can we do this so that we can still save the economy? Because that is really at the heart of the conversation we are having.
No, if you want my honest opinion, I think this is a very bad idea. It is a proposal that should be discarded. In other parts of the world, what states are doing is rather to create opportunities for the population in times of austerity to upgrade itself to gain knowledge and skills so that the knowledge and skills can then serve as a basis to create more and new innovations avenues to generate resources. We seem to be doing the opposite. Look, as a member of the Education Committee of Parliament, and as somebody who not long ago was a lecturer, I can tell you that this proposal would be fiercely resisted. Because, I truly cannot see why government decides, in the face of the many other opportunities available to rescue this economy, that this is one of the ways to go. Essentially proposing to dislocate and, in fact, discriminate and make it impossible for largely segments of the population that we should be putting measures in place to give equal opportunities to be left behind.
Dr. Park, you have raised issue. You have raised issue with the neglect, what you call the neglect of the of basic education in the country and over-concentration on secondary education, obviously because of what you say is the political capital the government is making out of the free SHS program. But we know that even the free SHS program has had its challenges. A few weeks ago, we're talking about the lack of food or shortages of food in some of the schools. Now, if government were to argue that this will allow it to concentrate, and capitation grant is in arrears of over 300 million or so
No, 4 tranches in arrears.
In arrears.
The
If the argument is that
owes buffer stock food supply.
That is so. If the argument is that this is to wean off public universities in order to give concentration to primary and secondary education, would that be justified?
No, it will not. It will not. And you see, I am worried because of the knee-jerk reaction. Because, you see, when you want to make these sorts of proposals, it requires serious engagements, debate, analysis, and deep thinking. You don't just off the cuff after an extended cabinet retreat make proposals that have the capacity to dislocate and disadvantage a population that you should be making room to promote in terms of what you describe as upward mobility. How are you going to achieve that so-called upward mobility through education when you are making a proposal that is going to make university education out of the reach of those who need it the most? That is my major concern. And look, I can tell you, this proposal is going to face serious resistance, and I doubt whether it will see the light of day.
Dr. Park, thank you very much for your time here on NewsDesk. Let me come to you, Kofi Asare. And Julius made an important point about the free SHS program. How do you think this is going to affect that program, the way they're structured?
That it is not interested in touching the free senior high school. It is not interested in touching the teacher training allowance because they are political programs. And so instead of that, it will rather touch the budget of other non-political interventions or other non-political budget lines, like, as it were, compensation for tertiary institutions. But we must resist that attempt because it will not be in the interest of the students. It is not in the interest of the Constitution of Ghana, which talks about progressively free secondary and tertiary education. And it is not in the interest of the Education Strategic Plan, which aims to ensure that there is up to 40% gross tertiary enrollment 40% gross tertiary enrollment by 2030. So it is actually a negation. This particular proposal is actually running counter to what government's broad plan is in the education sector. So we must draw the finance minister's attention to the fact that there is a plan to achieve 40% gross tertiary enrollment by 2030. And even without this cost cutting, if you like, cost cutting and cost sharing, because the cost is going to be shared with students. Without this cost cutting and cost sharing measure, that target is struggling to be attained because we have moved by just 1 percentage point over a 4-year period. And so bringing this will actually derail the attainment of the target for cross-sectional enrollment, and it will commodify education and it will make education more expensive. Government has a responsibility to provide tertiary education. It is not the responsibility of students. It is not the responsibility of universities to provide tertiary education. It is the responsibility of government and cannot be shared. If it is interested in cutting the compensation budget line of the Ministry of Education, that is fine. But where it should cut is the 250 million it spends on teacher training allowance. That is wasteful and must be cut. And not salaries.
I'm grateful that you can join us on this conversation. Thank you very much. That's the Executive Director of Education, Africa Education Watch, Kofi Asare there. Julius, let me have your final word on this, and then we'll take a break.
Well, it must be obvious to whoever is behind this policy, government, the Ministry of Finance, and all of its actors, that students are not going to sit meekly and allow this thing to happen. When government attempted to introduce utility bills and all that in the university, we resisted it. And any attempt to share the cost of compensation with students, and as it looks, it's not even about sharing, they are completely shifting it to us. Any attempt to shift the cost of compensation for lectures to students will be fiercely resisted, and the National Union of Ghana Students is going to be at the center of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Julius. That's the General Secretary of the National Union of Ghana Students. You're watching Newsdesk with me, Ernest Mina. Our top story this hour: government announces plans to wean off public universities from its payroll and to provide them with what it calls a block grant. There have been fierce opposition to this announcement. We're taking a break. On Worry 10, we'll bring you more. Plus, the Black Stars game. We'll take you to Kumasi and gauge the mood in that city. Stay with us.